What were your main terrain objectives in the March offensive, as in the jump off from Della Characha on March 3rd?
Actually, I can't remember whether whether Company F was involved in the offensive or in the reserve, because I remember the objective and I remember, but I think we were in the reserve at that time. I'd have to check the history.
How did you react when you heard about the wounding of Hank Hampton on March 4th at Sasamalara, or did you hear of it?
I didn't hear then, but I did hear about my own battalion commander, Durrett Townsend, was wounded, and it had been long expected because he took such risks in his Jeep, and I think he ran over a mine or something and the Jeep flipped. But he was soon back to duty, and I'm sure that Colonel Hampton did the same, acted the same.
How did the leadership change in the 86 after those two incidences?
It didn't.
Okay.
To my knowledge.
Okay. Can you comment on the German adherence to the Geneva Convention in regards to shooting medics?
Well, I can name one instance, and that is the one where I was at what is the one I was just telling you about? At
Rocco.
No, before that.
Della Characha?
No, Toriusi.
Toriusi. Okay.
The story I've just told about Toriusi. When I got back to cover, I sent a medic out naturally to see what had happened to the three out there. And it wasn't long before he came back crying and said, "They shot at me, they're shooting at me." And I remember I almost held him in my arms as he sobbed, and I said, "Well, don't worry about it," and I called for another medic.
That must have been pretty demoralizing for him to have that happen.
It was, evidently. He was not prepared for it.
Did the 86 realize that they had opened a breach in the German line?
Not at company level. I'm sure the regiment as a regiment knew all that, but we knew that we'd done what we were supposed to do.
Now, you got evacuated and went behind the lines. Did you come back into combat after that, or?
Unfortunately, I didn't, because I was hospitalized back in Livorno, or I can't remember the name. I will. Anyway, I met Sergeant Frank Sargent then back there. He'd recovered from his hepatitis, and we said, "Let's go find F Company." And we weren't, we just walked out of the hospital. Also met Ralph Lafferty there, who had been wounded, helping me out. And, but he was due for a longer stay. So Sarge and I took off and hitchhiked our way all through where the units had been, and arrived at Lake Garda and Riva. Just as the plane flew over, we heard it one night fly over, and they said, "That's the peace plane going to negotiate."
Oh, how did you feel?
Felt pretty good, and everyone was celebrating in Riva. We took over a hotel, like F Company did, and it was, and we had gasoline to put in the boats, and everybody was out riding around in boats and so forth. But I'm I just, I missed some of the rough fighting, some of the roughish fighting.
Was that
along the shores of Lake Garda,
uh-huh.
particularly, where they had to go through the tunnels.
Some of the, I guess, Bob Crumb's patrol went up over the tunnels, up in the high country, and then came down in Nauvoo. Did you hear any stories about that?
Yes, I understand that that some of the units had to do that because the Germans had their 88s in Riva, and they were zeroed in on every tunnel along that windy road that on the east side of Lake Garda. Now, some of the units went on the west side of Garda too, which was not as heavily fortified, and of course some went in boats, and so they were all under direct fire as they approached.
How did you two hitchhikers manage to get?
We'd get on a supply truck or a weapons carrier or something, and just go as far as they were going in our direction, and we knew that where our unit was pretty well. And there's another story about when we got to Riva at the end of Lake Garda. The next day, Sarge said, why don't we find a Jeep and go up and see my old ski instructor up in Bolzano. He had spent some winters, he was brought up in Boston, and he had spent some winters there, and so we took a little trip and we found him.
It's pretty neat. What were your feelings when you were convalescing in the hospital?
Well, I've never liked hospitals, and I didn't like them then. But I will say that when I woke up in the hospital after having the last remembrance was the ambulance ride, which I woke up enough. You know, they give you morphine the minute you get wounded, and sometimes they give you morphine at the aid station, and then they give you morphine at the battalion station, and then, you know, pretty soon you're out. But I do remember kind of waking up in the roughest ride. I couldn't imagine, well, I imagined that we were going over hill and dale as fast as we could go. I mean, like this, and bumpy and weird. But when I woke up in a hospital bed with white sheets and a female nurse.
And as you were convalescing, did you feel, I mean, it sounds to me like you felt like you needed to be back with your men. Was there any ambivalence there, or? No,
the problem is you lose complete contact. You're nowhere. You're all alone. You're not with your men, and you're not in the army. You're not, and the war isn't over. And so it's not. There's nothing to do there. When we were ambulatory, we could walk down on the beach. Big deal. No blondes on the beach.
What effect, when you were in Riva, what effect did Darbys' death have on the troops? Do you have any recollection of that?
No. The only effect that I remember was when a friend of mine, Ralph Browngun, was killed, and that was had a very definite effect on me. And I had seen him the day before. What
date was that, Percy?
I don't remember, but it was, I had gone up to see him on a Sunday because I was scheduled to replace the unit.
And this was where?
Well, it was on the backside of some steep hill. I don't remember the name of it, and I went up to see him, and they were having coffee and sitting outside their foxholes. And we visited a while. Chaplain Brenda Mill, who was our battalion chaplain, was with him. And as I left after we talked, went down, and I heard that they were shelled and that he was killed. Mm-hmm. And since he had been one of my buddies during all the training and so forth, all the ski trips and everything, and the plans to go to Aspen afterwards, it was a big blow.
Mm. I can certainly understand that. That would be very difficult, especially when you feel like you're done with a lot of the hard stuff and something else happens. Lastly, I guess the 10th went up to Yugoslavia, and they were kind of like peacemakers there. Do you have any, or peacekeepers, do you have any memories of that?
Yes, I do, because again, F Company went on that assignment, and I remember it like this. We were on one side of the street, a street with buildings solid together, bars and stores and shops and so forth, and we were in doorways and stationed there, and the Russians were on the other side of that street. The streets are only about 20 or 30 feet wide, and things were fine all during, and there'd be a tank, either a Russian tank on one end maybe, and one of our tanks on the other end of that street, and everything was quiet until evening, and till these sentries, I guess you'd call them, we had to post there, and when the bars opened or whatever, there'd be a little noise and activity, and maybe a few shots up in the air, who knows. But it was kind of a hairy situation.
You could feel the tension there,
yes,
then, huh?
Yes, and I don't know what happened. Soon we were relieved and we took off. I don't know whether they ever, what happened after that, but we were there.
Could you tell who your enemies were?
Well, yes, they had Russian uniforms. They weren't our enemies at that time. Mm-hmm. That's the problem. Mm-hmm. But they were not our friends. I mean, we didn't know if they were our friends or not.
Was there a different feeling than being with the Italians?
Oh, yes, yeah. See, the Italians were actually volunteered to help us. They were on our side. And although their help was not evidenced very strongly.
You got to do some rock climbing while you were there? There's some very high mountains?
No, I didn't. No. We went skiing. I did quite a bit of skiing in Austria, the Großglockner. We, again, Francis Sargent said, we were sort of co-captains, I guess, of the company then. I don't remember whether I got reassigned or what. But we took off, and with many of the enlisted men too, and we went up into Austria and to the Großglockner, and there was a inn there, the Franz Josef House, which was partway up the mountain, and we would stay there on a weekend, stay overnight, and ski on the glacier. Wow. Then we, more and more people, we thought we'd discovered it ourselves and it was all ours. Pretty soon it became a regimental recreation area. And
word traveled fast, huh?
And, yeah, and but we did have some ski races there one day, yeah.
Wow. Did you sense when you were in Yugoslavia, this is a very hindsight question, that you were kind of at the beginning of the Cold War, that
No.
things weren't going to get
We didn't know
resolved?
why we were there, in a sense, other than that we had met. The Russians had come in from a different direction, surrounding the Germans, and they were kaput, and we met them. And Trieste was the Italian, well, I guess it's Italian city. It's not independent, I don't think. But it's right on the border, and so it was natural that the Russians would occupy the other side of the border. It wasn't Russia, but it's one of the Balkans, and that we would occupy Italy.
How about Cave de Pradil? Did you go to Cave de Pradil? Sort of like Camp Hale?
Where, no.
In Yugoslavia somewhere.
No.
I don't know. I'm not familiar with that.
No, to my knowledge, we never moved into Yugoslavia. That our job was to patrol the border.
Mm-hmm.
And their job was to patrol their border.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Just to rewind a little bit, and then we'll be you could sum things up. Let's talk a little bit about that lieutenant that we heard about on Raver Ridge. The one that...
Oh, well, I only get this secondhand from one of my sergeants, that they were, I'm not sure whether they were on the right side or the lower side or the left side or the upper side, but in any case, they they ran into some little light fog or whatever, and they were climbing or scaling this cliff, and evidently he got disoriented and couldn't really cut it as far as keeping going, and I think it was partly physical and partly lack of conditioning and training, because he was a substitute or had been sent down as a substitute. I don't recall his name.
Okay. Do you think being in the 10th Mountain Division shaped your life?
I have answered that. I've answered questions about times that shape my life. I don't believe in times that shape your life. Your life goes on because of those events, and they color your life and they make it what it is. But they don't change it in a mental way that you decide to do something. I had already decided what I wanted to do after the war, and I did it.
You want to talk about that a little bit?
Not too much, but no, I had decided to go to Aspen, and I did. And the first thing I did when I returned from furlough after the war and returned to Colorado to what is it called? What camp is it?
Camp Carson.
Carson. And the first thing I did was go to the hospital and look up Friedl Pfeifer, who I knew was in the hospital. He'd been very severely wounded. So, and I said, are we still going to Aspen? And he said, yeah. So we did.
Okay. How would you describe, obviously the 10th, because of the skills that the men had in there, and the men who didn't have it, many of them learned it. How would you describe the spirit of the 10th?
I think it was I won't say it was equal to something like some of these special units like the Rangers, the SEALs, and the Green Berets and so forth, because they're inbred with spirit. They're trained to have spirit and all. We were just guys who liked the mountains, liked to ski, and had been active all our lives. And we just felt that's what life was all about. And so it made for someone watching it would say, oh boy, they're, And military leaders, of course, most of them not being, the top leaders, not being from that environment, thought, oh, these guys are something else, they climb cliffs, they ski, they do all these crazy things. And that's how, our reputation came more from people like Mark Clark and not Eisenhower, but the president even, because we were different.
What did it mean to you to be in the 10th, looking back at it now?
Well, that's too long a story because I had an uncle who was in World War I, was killed 18 days before the war was over. And I was in a very similar situation. I was nearly killed not 18, but a couple of weeks before the war was over. But I had to go through the early part of it with that in the back of my mind. I had to make sure I kept it in the back of my mind, because I learned fairly quickly from what happened, from the people that did get hit or got killed early on, that they tended to worry and to feel that something might happen to them. So I had to fight against it. That's not for publication.
Okay, all right. Is there anything else you would like to say to conclude this interview? Any other?
Well, I just feel honored to be able to say anything. I've kept contact with a few of my good friends that were in the 10th. I have not been a very good alumnus, although I've been to two national meetings, and I keep in touch, and I read the Flurry all the time, and the Blizzard and everything else, and I belong to the Sierra Nevada chapter. I've been to 2 or 3 meetings, which have proven to be very interesting, and that's where I met you. And but otherwise, and it's strange. It is strange that people that have heard about it think it is something special. And many of my friends here, well, some of them are competing to see who's going to read my obituary, because they...
That's a black sense of humor. Because?
Well, because they think I'm a hero.
Well,
of course, they're younger than I am. They didn't go through.
We've interviewed a number of men that you were in your company, and they felt in very good hands.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I was proud to have them in my company. Thank you.
Thank you, Percy. All right.